We're going to talk about USC wide receiver transfer Gary Bryant Jr. He's definitely the biggest name that the Ducks are tracking right now in the transfer portal. He has set a reported commitment date of May 13th, according to Greg Biggins over there on 247. Does an awesome job in the SoCal area and really nationally. Been able to see Greg at a lot of camps and stuff, which is dope. But yeah, so May 13th. I think Oregon wasn't the last visit that he took. I think it was Oregon and then A&M. I might be getting that mixed up.
No, you get it right.
But this is an interesting guy to look at right now because it looks like Oregon's in the driver's seat. You know, from the people that I've talked to close to the program, it looks like they really like Oregon's chances. Not necessarily a done deal or a home run type of a decision. But it's looking like they're in a really good spot here, and that would be a good addition for them for sure. I think that Bo Nix has played a big role in that recruitment. He talked about it as much when he was looking to bring Tez in, saying, I talked to the wide receivers in the room, Chris and Troy, and I'm like, hey, I want us to have a competitive room, and they were like, we're all for it. So it would be a big addition. He could do some he could have some additional value in the return game as well. But I think the question for me, Colin, kind of becomes, if he were to come to Oregon, where does he stack up in that receiver room, and who does he maybe displace in the depth chart from kind of the early grip that we have on that position right now?
Yeah, so bringing in Gary Bryant Jr., just go over his stats. So this past season, he only had 2 receptions for 15 yards. But his prior season in 2021 was very, very good. He had over 570 yards, 7 touchdowns. He also had a rushing touchdown, which is interesting. But who would he displace? You have the freshman coming in, the big freshman, 5-star Jurion Dickey. He hasn't been fully healthy since the end of his season. You look at that, and he's also not on campus, if I recall. He will be one of those kind of normal date, I guess, guys there for the summer. You look at guys like Josh Delgado, who are just kind of right on the edge there, kind of holding on to a spot. And you wonder if a move like this would push him maybe to the portal. You also look at other guys. So you brought in Alabama wide receiver, or former wide receiver, Trayshawn Holden. Spring's gone very well for him, according to everything that I have heard from media availability and whatnot. Wonder if maybe his spot would be what was taken, or whether it would be Bo Nix's adopted brother in Troy transfer Tez Johnson. Tez Johnson, though, is an absolute blazer. He is extremely, extremely fast. And I think regardless of who you have in this room, Tez will have to see the field because of that. I think that Troy Franklin is probably the only wide receiver who won't be at risk of being moved somewhere. I like Chris Hudson a lot. I think he's due for a breakout year as well. But I can't help but think that a move like this would only kind of stunt his growth a little bit.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of good points there. And I think that the one about Troy having the only lockdown spot makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, I think bringing in high school versus transfer portal guys have 2 very different, messages and 2 different sets of expectations, because no one's transferring to your school to ride the bench. When not the high school guys are signing with you to ride the bench, but there's different levels of expectations, that come with that. And I think that Trayshawn Holden, he's been doing a really good job. He's kind of their big body wide receiver, along with Kyler Casper, who I also think is in line for a breakout year. 6'6", 200 pounds, freak athlete kind of a guy. But Trayshawn Holden's been doing well. I was talking to somebody the other day that was able to take in that scrimmage last weekend, and that was the same point that we just keep hearing. The more people I ask, Tez just moves differently. He's so fast and kind of just on a different level from anybody in that room. So that kind of makes me think that spot in the slot is going to be more open than maybe people had thought going into spring, with that being kind of Chris Hudson's job. But then you also have Jurion Dickey, who's coming in, and I mean, everybody's expectations is that he's going to be playing a very significant role. I don't know if that means starting right away. I'm going to be interested to see how his kind of transition compares to Troy Franklin, because we saw Troy Franklin a decent amount in 2021, but Oregon couldn't throw the ball. It was a bunch of check downs and just a mess of an offense. But then, once he got under Kenny Dillingham's system, he was just getting let loose, and that's what Will Stein wants to do. He said, I think a lot of people took it out of blew it out of proportion when he said players are overrated, players are what matters more. I get the sentiment, but I think that there's just so many good guys that Oregon's going to have. But I don't know where Gary Bryant would slide in, because he's an experienced guy, and he had a pretty good year at USC before these transfers came in, Addison and Mario Williams and Brendan Rice, and he kind of got pushed to the wayside. And Oregon was a top school for him coming out of high school. Washington was also recruiting him when Junior Adams was on staff. So I think it's shaping up to be a really good addition for Oregon. But like you mentioned, guys like Josh Delgado, Justice Lowe is a younger guy they're looking to try to get more involved this year. I think it makes the room more crowded, but at the end of the day, you're giving yourself more options, and you want to be a more dangerous offense, and I think that's something that Gary Bryant ultimately allows you to do. So I think that if he wants to come, you're going to take him, and then try to figure out the depth chart later.
Yeah, and just to add on a little bit, as to some of the other guys that are definitely in the mix too, like you mentioned, Kyler Casper, he is definitely in the mix. He is a guy that could be towards the bottom in a sense, or he could be very, very high up. He is a very high potential player there. He's also from Arizona, if I recall, going back to that Moga stuff. You also have Justice Lowe, like you just mentioned. I believe that was the first flip that Dan Lanning had as a coach, flipped him from Utah and had him come in. He was only a 3-star, and now he has already, I guess, passed expectations in spring, and he looks to be a potential big-time player. There's a few other guys as well in the mix. Trying to think of who exactly. Cozart, yes. Ashton Cozart is a guy that I think is going to be very, very good. Really just like seeing him play in high school, I think he is a very, very good player and could develop very well. These are all guys that are in the mix. And then you also wonder, with some big-bodied guys here, do you potentially move them to address the need at tight end, which is maybe one of the points that we'll discuss later on. A big guy could move there. That way you can have essentially 5 wide receivers on the field whenever you want it, if you're going to run a 4 wide out set. And it just depends, I guess, really with how everybody does when they arrive. And I'm mainly saying that Jurion Dickey, if he's fully healthy, I think the sky's the limit for that kid. And he could be definitely, like you said, significant playing time right away. And it's just going to be very, very interesting to see how, I guess, the cookie crumbles here.
Yeah, and it's funny because when the season ended, you lose Coda from a year ago. He's the main, loss in that room. And then you have, a bunch of transfers. Dante Thornton to Tennessee. I think he's going to kill it. I think that's going to be the biggest loss for Oregon in the transfer portal, honestly. If either him or Keith Brown, that was a move that caught a lot of people by surprise. But you lose Seven McGee, Isaiah Brevard, Isaiah Crocker, a lot of guys. But I think that this wide receiver room is honestly looking more deep, if not more promising, the more I talk about it and the more we go through spring football. And Oregon's going to have a lot of weapons in that position to really, open things up or keep opening things up, because they got opened up with Kenny Dillingham, and Will Stein doesn't sound like he's going to, shy away from that by any means.